As the only human in a world of orcs, Bayer was raised by an orc master who found her and brought her home. She grew up to become a formidable adventurer. Her usual tasks involve dealing with 8-legged beasts that drift from the sea to the mainland. These creatures release toxins upon reaching land, which can severely injure or kill ordinary orcs. Hence, specialized adventurers like Bayer are called upon to handle the situation. However, Bayer is unique as she is human. She lacks the typical Orcish features of ears and horns and isn't furry, leading to her rejection by the orcs. Yet, Bayer is undeterred. She fights these monsters to harvest their fruits and meat, which the orcs find terrifying. Bayer, noticing the fearful glances of others, silently removes her coat, tests the beast's movements in the water, then returns to shore, tearing off one of its tentacles. She charges with her great sword, and as the beast is struck, it emits a burst of venom that could ruin nearby food and water supplies. Bayer must speed up her attack. Tied up by the beast, she hears its inner voice. It was on a mission to spread its seeds, but longs to return to the sea, now impossible. Unfortunately, Bayer now shares her fate with the orc forces and must kill the monster. She leaves the scene with one of its tentacles and a seed. The Rat Clan, who manage the orcs, promises to send her payment later. Bayer leaves the village with the seed and tosses it into a river, empathizing with its inability to return home. Back home, Bayer recounts the battle to her master, Labrak, who explains that the monster, named Hana, was fulfilling its mission. Labrak believes everything in this world desires integration. Bayer, puzzled why Labrak doesn't solve such issues despite being more powerful and only teaching her, doesn't understand his reluctance to use magic. After defeating Hana, Bayer feels she can no longer stay in this town. Labrak suggests that the country is vast and Bayer could explore it, as she might find acceptance elsewhere despite the risk of being taken by the Hunger Alliance, a group of this world's dissenters. Uncertain of where to go, Bayer feels alienated due to her different appearance and feels incredibly lonely. Labrak identifies her feeling as homesickness, suggesting travel as a solution. Though no one in the kingdom is like Bayer, exploring the world might lead her to people who will accept her. As Labrak's apprentice, it's time for Bayer to develop independently, as he cannot always guide her. Bayer was born from a stone, lacking tails and ears from birth, which led to her being ostracized by the surrounding orcs. Despite this, a kind orc couple adopted her. Yet, as a child, Bayer struggled to accept her differences from those around her. Using her youthful appearance, she sneaked into the palace and found a great sword in the cellar, smooth and hairless like her, which she befriended by awakening it. However, she was soon caught by a knight who arrived on the scene. After she stepped outside, she looked up to see a huge planet in the sky, very much like Earth. From that point on, Bayer was imprisoned until her master took her away. One day, as orcs came to deliver her payment, they ran away in fear upon seeing her. Following Labrak's advice, Bayer decided to travel. Before her departure, Labrak gave her one last lesson, mentioning that everyone on a journey is cursed differently. For instance, aside from teaching, Labrak could not use magic, as the curse traveled through the traveler's blood. The two cut their fingers and clasped hands. Labrak asked Bayer what her purpose was for her journey. Bayer responded that she wanted to find her origins and her kin, and she wanted to integrate into this world. Labrak told her that the curse would eventually turn into a blessing. Just as the curse was fulfilled, Bayer found her memories of Labrak fading. Labrak revealed that his purpose was for Bayer to reach places he could not, and he tasked her with killing him. Labrak explained that Bayer would eventually understand the significance of the sword she held. After setting out on her journey, Bayer visited the place of her birth and saw the scattered stones around her, wondering about their origins. Following a night's sleep, she encountered children from the Rabbit Clan, who are said to bring good fortune to travelers. Bayer shared her drink with them, and then left her birthplace. Soon after, Bayer arrived at the capital of Sword Country. Upon entering the city gates, she drew stares from passers-by. As she walked into a restaurant, the orc diners fell silent because Bayer, lacking fur, ears, and horns, appeared odd to them. However, the restaurant owner treated her normally. It seemed in this world, good and evil were assigned at birth, with the capital divided into the inner city of good and the outer city of evil. The owner mentioned they were in the outer city and advised buyer to figure out soon which side she belonged to. Buyer said it didn't matter because she was a traveler and would soon leave. However, the owner mentioned that such actions were forbidden by the gods. The ruler of Sword Country was not a king, but an entity known as a god. Buyer felt a splitting headache, recalling someone had taught her that the ruler here was called the mechanical god. It seemed she had already killed her teacher. At that moment, the Rabbit clan children Buyer had met earlier were captured by evil swordsmen planning to kill them. Buyer argued that being evil and doing evil were different. If the swordsmen couldn't understand that, they didn't deserve to be called swordsmen. Before the owner could intervene, Buyer had already broken their swords, and the Rabbit clan had chewed up the broken blades. Buyer also realized she could break weapons but couldn't harm orcs. Perhaps this was the curse of her journey. The owner said that righteous swordsmen had arrived and urged Buyer, who lacked a dueling license, to leave quickly. He added that the swordsmen whose swords were broken could no longer wield them. Soon, soldiers arrived and took Buyer away. She felt the place was familiar and seemed to be waiting for someone, but sadly, she couldn't remember who. Instead, she smashed the door herself and asked the guards to call her senior brother. Meanwhile, the restaurant owner met Adonis, who should have been in the inner city. Adonis had come immediately after hearing about the swordsman incident at the restaurant, without even seeing his family. As soon as Adonis went upstairs, monsters from the Hunger Alliance appeared in the town, possibly attracted by the scent of their kind. It seemed someone who detested the city was about to join them. After entering the prison, Buyer had the guard fetch her senior brother Gap, resulting in her release and a room. Gap also prepared a dueling license for her. Buyer was amazed at how capable her master was, although she had completely lost her memories of him. Regarding the dueling license, Buyer couldn't accept it, saying she wanted to be a traveler. Gap told Buyer that to embark on her journey, she must fulfill the king's regulations. For now, Buyer would serve the country as a swordswoman. Buyer mentioned she was cursed, as her weapon seemed not to function properly. Previously, Buyer could kill any creature or race, but Gap thought this might actually be the real curse. Still, to help Buyer rediscover herself, Gap advised her to accept the dueling license, which she agreed to. Unexpectedly, the Rabbit clan had also followed her. Gap told Buyer that having the Rabbit clan join her on her journey should be seen as an honor. Before leaving, he promised to arrange a meeting with the king soon and asked if Buyer wanted to see her foster parents. Buyer said the timing wasn't right. That night, Buyer bathed with the little male rabbit, realizing it couldn't speak. She held it with a sense of pity. Buyer left the message "Cherish" on her dueling license, hearing from Gap that her master had left the same message. Then a guiding voice emerged in Buyer's mind, telling her she needed to become a joyful swordsman and gain the gods' favor to open the gates of travel before the gods. However, as Buyer followed Gap inside, she felt the throne resembled a tombstone, though it was called the Sword God Tree. The king appeared, but the tree did not gaze at her. Buyer then declared her intention to start her journey to find her origin and belonging, not wanting to be alone anymore. The king arranged for a swordsman for Buyer to challenge, stating that if she succeeded, she could embark on her journey. The opponent was someone whose sword Buyer had previously shattered. Unbeknownst to Buyer, her master Labrak had not died. After their duel, her memories of Labrak were sealed, and indeed she had broken his weapon. But Labrak had found a guide to help repair it. Buyer's arrival in the capital also had another purpose, to reveal the truth about the Holy Ash. Buyer was called the Truth Teller, as opposed to the Skeptics. After meeting her opponent named Keel, Buyer remembered he was the knight whose weapon she had accidentally broken when she first acquired her great sword. Adonis, a man from earlier, also came to watch the contest. Gap was surprised to see Adonis there, as he remembered Adonis disliked such contests. It seemed the custom in this world was to kill the opponent after winning, but Buyer's sword could not take life. So after defeating Keel, she broke his sword again without taking his life, which displeased the other spectators. However, Buyer had indeed won. The king acknowledged her victory, but reminded her that she had 3 tasks left to complete, and advised her to understand her curse, otherwise, it could not transform into a blessing. After the contest, Gap brought something called Holy Ash, which could instantly heal wounds and relieve pain. Buyer found it strange. The voice in her mind then spoke. telling her that for a swordsman, a sword is like limbs, to be nurtured all life long. Once broken, growth ends and decay begins. Bayer knew this but could not kill others, seeming only able to break weapons, making her quite heretical. Meanwhile, the king met his brother, Labrak, who was also of royal blood, but had escaped the royal family with Bayer's help and was now considered dead. After meeting the king, Labrak left. In Bayer's room, a rabbit chewing on stones suddenly reverted to its original form, realizing its line of fate was gone. It then opened the window, summoned its clan, and left with them to search for something. The fate line was taken by a few evil swordsmen who had previously captured the rabbit. Adonis gave these people a bottle of holy ash, which they said could restore a broken sword. They planned to seek revenge on the rabbit and Bayer after restoring their swords. However, the rabbit approached them first, reclaimed its fate clock, cast an illusion on them, and also stole the holy ash from the table. The next day, Bayer learned from Gap that the evil swordsmen were attacking the lower city district where her foster parents lived. Only those with knight qualifications could join the counterattack, and it was too late for Bayer to qualify. Using her weapon would result in a large fine. Bayer rushed out with her weapon but couldn't find her foster parents. She heard they were taken by people from outside the city because there was a shortage of musical instruments necessary for crop growth. The outsiders likely abducted people and stole instruments to survive. Bayer quickly found the kidnapped people. During the battle, she shattered a spell and discovered she could now cut things. The knights arrived, and Bayer successfully rescued her hostage parents, who had their own child named after Bayer. They still considered Bayer their child. Bayer resolved her feelings and bid farewell to her parents, declaring her intention to become a traveler. Later, Bayer realized her necklace was missing, stolen by the fleeing outsiders who were not content with losing to her. Then she encountered a young rabbit named Katie. Bayer, unable to find her necklace, was wandering around the city when Katie approached her. Claiming to be related to Bayer's rabbit companion, Katie took Bayer to a restaurant and ordered a song for her. Songs in this world are typically used for planting crops and building, but this restaurant used them to soothe patrons. The singer was a traveler who could no longer speak except to sing, a curse from her journey. Bayer felt sympathy. Then Katie revealed that Bayer's foster parents had always known about her journey but still loved her deeply. Bayer cried, and when she looked up, Katie had left, having traded the fate clock for Bayer's necklace. Bayer's rescue of the city's residents unexpectedly completed her first task. The mechanical deity decided to reward her by letting her place her weapon on a scale and gave her an equivalent amount of money based on its weight. The king's reward provided Bayer with substantial funds. However, the god tree still did not notice her. Bayer still had 2 trials to face and needed to gain the attention of the god tree. Bayer curiously asked Gap about the 4 great knights of the capital besides himself and Kiel. Gap mentioned that one of them, named Titian, had disappeared without a trace and could be either male or female, as their aquatic race can change their appearance and voice, making them impossible to find if they choose to hide. The other knight also had secrets. Right after this conversation, Bayer and Gap came across Adonis, who was cornered in an alley by 2 knights accusing him of stealing swords. It was rumored that Adonis took weapons from deceased knights, but whether he sold them or used them himself was unknown. Bayer wondered why Adonis didn't forge his own swords, as typically, swords not personally cultivated were unusable. Adonis was also seen wearing gloves, seemingly afraid to touch the swords. After Adonis left, Bayer found newborn kittens in a nearby courtyard and began feeding them quietly. The next day, she saw knights beating Adonis in the courtyard and intervened, only to find the kittens cut up on the ground. The knights were using them to test their swords. Bayer defeated them, believing that no true knight would harm the weak, and helped Adonis back to his place. Adonis told Bayer that it was customary to use the kittens for sword testing, but he agreed with Bayer that one should not swing at the weak. Adonis had also heard about Bayer from Gap, who referred to her as the Truth Seeker. In Adonis's room, Bayer saw a flower of the deceased, which uses a dead body as its seedling and notifies the deceased's family of their death. Hearing that Bayer was to attend the knight's examination, Adonis summoned his dog, which swallowed them both into another space, said to be Adonis's actual residence, which was cleaner and tidier. Adonis then applied holy ash, which he admitted was procured through bribery. Bayer remembered that holy ash was strictly controlled by the clergy. Curiously, she asked Adonis why they called her the Truth Seeker. Adonis was unsure, but mentioned that Bayer's master once said she was someone with a special destiny. Bayer stated she was not someone remarkable. She was just searching for her homeland and kin. Curious about why Adonis took others' weapons, Adonis explained that he was questioning the city. He showed her his sword, engraved with the word doubter in the language of the gods, which could align all sword attributes with his own. As a doubter, Adonis used these weapons of the deceased to question the nation's origins and the true meaning of swords. He himself was unclear about why he did this. Bayer, seeing a reflection of herself in the confused Adonis, sympathized with him, as being chosen as a doubter led him to question everything, making him fearful of wielding weapons again. At that moment, Adonis's dog had run inside the palace and was live-streaming a conversation of the king to Bayer. The king mentioned one of the 4 knights, Titian, saying that Titian had turned evil. Adonis was not surprised by this. He told Bayer that Titian had a bad habit of playing the Minotaur, specifically targeting and breaking up couples, seducing both parties, and setting himself as the prize to incite fights, as if he were a god controlling human nature. Eventually, Gap couldn't stand it anymore and challenged Titian, breaking his weapon, after which Titian disappeared and likely fell into evil, planning revenge against justice. It seemed Titian had failed the test of justice. The so-called test of justice was the method to restore a broken sword. Titian was the complete opposite of Adonis, who was originally from the outer city, while the selection of the king's knights continued. Bayer was to train with these knights, and she and Adonis were in the same team, with Gap as their team leader. This selection was expected to challenge Titian. Gap advised them not to stand out too much because Titian's evil brigade was hiding in a very dangerous cave. Therefore, Gap wanted Adonis to become the commander of that brigade to prevent their own first brigade from being overwhelmed. However, Adonis felt that those people would not listen to him. Meanwhile, Labrak met Katie. Both were wandering princes of their respective kingdoms. Labrak had raised Bayer, the Truth Seeker, while Katie was responsible for observing the Truth Seeker. Whether to take Bayer away was up to Katie to decide. If Bayer was an uncontrollable evil presence, then those aware of her existence would also be eliminated. But to leave a kingdom, one must question the reasons of that nation. The gods fear being questioned, and thus try to kill the Truth Seeker in the cradle. For Labrak, Bayer was the only one who could surpass him. The campaign then began, and Bayer and Adonis's team set off, including a sticky couple in the team. The responsible commander was not Adonis, but a member of the rat race. The man in the couple was particularly arrogant, always having scripted attacks and asking the scriptwriter to write him more impressively. There were also monitors in the team. Anyone who erred would be recorded and punished. After Bayer and Adonis descended, they found the vanguard team seriously injured, with everyone watching the 2nd Brigade, sympathizing with the fate they were about to face. Now it was clear why Bayer's previous combat was called crude. It turns out that battles in this other world even required their own music accompaniment, with bands playing while fighting and casting spells and support barriers. Bayer and her team were the vanguard, quickly encountering the first monster, a giant spider. Bayer had seen this type of spider before. Killing it would release smaller monsters. However, these greenhouse-grown swordsmen didn't know this, so they were caught off guard. While the soldiers were frantically killing the small spiders, Bayer discovered that the rear guard was being ambushed and prepared to lead the team to urgently retreat. Then, the great sword on her back suddenly began to shake, avoiding sudden magic attacks, causing the entire brigade to start sinking. Adonis immediately yelled for everyone to retreat, but then a large sword emerged from the ground, swinging at them. The commander was killed in the chaos. The assailant was none other than the legendary Titian. Seeing that Bayer was also targeted, she had no choice but to flee deeper into the cave. There, she encountered the female knight from the couple she had met before. The female knight was startled by Bayer. At that moment, Bayer noticed the weapon on her back moving again. The female knight's lover appeared, covered in blood and looking like a zombie. The female knight, terrified, kept attacking her lover until Bayer stopped her from mutilating the body. The aquatic female knight calmed down somewhat with Bayer's reassurance. Unexpectedly, the lover attacked again, and Bayer cut him down with a single strike. Bayer was surprised. Her sword was actually able to move? Suddenly, Katie appeared, scaring the female knight who tried to flee. Bayer instinctively blocked her, accidentally breaking the knight's weapon. The female knight broke down in tears. Katie explained to Bayer that the aquatic people are a unique race who place great importance on their emotions, anchoring their souls in their lovers. If their lover dies, their soul gradually disintegrates. To maintain their soul, they must constantly engage in relationships, regardless of gender. In other words, they shift from being love-focused to promiscuous. After being comforted by Bayer, the female knight seemed to transfer her attachment to Bayer. At this time, the other two team members arrived. All the teammates who were killed outside had revived and began to fight each other. Thinking that Titian might be controlling the dead bodies, rage surged in Bayer. The calm female knight, Bejn, heard voices in the distance. Following the sounds, they found a hidden cave, and inside, they found Adonis. Adonis explained that this was a monster's performance area, information given to him by the evil leader. The teammates suspected Adonis had ties with the evil faction. However, Adonis clarified that good and evil have always coexisted, maintaining balance until Titian instigated this war. Their true enemy should be Titian. Following Adonis into the tunnel, they found Titian enjoying controlling the dead bodies, which bore marks similar to those of the divine tree. They were soon discovered by Titian, with the controlled bodies blocking their escape. Adonis summoned swords from the dead through his dog, breaking after each use but successfully helping them evade pursuit. Katie used magic to seal the door. They met the beastman who had led them earlier, named Kimbuk, also the leader who had kidnapped Bayer's foster parents, and previously Titian's leader. Kimbuk revealed that Titian wasn't always like this and brought news of an impending attack by the Justice League, saying she came to seek revenge against justice. Upon seeing Adonis, she went mad. The team suspected Adonis knew Titian, but Adonis said Titian hated someone else who had defied the divine words and fled the battle, resulting in execution by the priests. It was Adonis who informed Titian of her beloved's death, which had since affected Titian's behavior. From now on, both sides agreed that their common enemy was Titian. They could no longer be exploited by him, so they decided to join forces. Initially, Bejn disagreed, but after seeing that Bayer had agreed, and now heavily reliant on Bayer, she consented to the alliance. This marked the first joint battle between good and evil. They needed a commander, and the best candidate was Katie, a traveler not involved with either side. Her payment would be the fate clock she had left behind. Then, a man from the evil squad stepped forward, asking if Adonis's hand had healed. Adonis shook his head, indicating that even the sacred ashes could not heal it. It was then that Bayer learned these two were father and son. Although Adonis's family lived in the outer city, they belonged neither to the side of good nor evil. Their sole aim was to protect the city. The group then formed their battle strategy, and Bayer felt a surge of excitement. By this time, Titian had already marshaled his army of controlled corpses. As the battle ensued, the scriptwriter, Guinness, was crafting the script in the background, arranging every fight tactically, a true strategist. Since enemies would emerge from both tunnels, Bayer and her team took to a bridge, blocking both paths, an incredibly foolish setup, risking the zombies blowing up both ends of the bridge. Titian's control over the corpses, which could even emerge from the ground, was particularly problematic. The general then used himself as bait to lure these corpses, a nonsensical tactic that seemed brainless to onlookers. As zombies increased in number, Bayer glanced at Adonis during the fight and noticed his hand withering along with his weapon, feeling pity for him. Soon after, Bejn was attacked and injured in one eye. Due to her aquatic nature, Bayer instinctively felt a protective urge towards her. Meanwhile, attracted by Bayer's protection, Bejn's feelings grew, even causing her to change genders, an attribute of her species. On the other side, knowing Titian's temperament, Guinness prepared to provoke him. The group took a brief rest to heal their wounds with sacred ashes while altering the underground water flow, essential since Titian, also an aquatic, could manipulate water flows. The underground caves were very dark, so Adonis's father led the way. He told Bayer that in such darkness, one could navigate by sensing the Earth's aura and using consciousness to guide the way, a skill anyone could learn with training. Finally, they entered a place called the Path of Heaven Cemetery, filled with tombstones and many death crows. a highly sacred area and their secret base. Now, they had to use it for battle. Kimbuck asked Katie to cover the cemetery with a barrier. The team's only priest objected, fearing the numerous corpses would make it easier for Titian to exert control, but no one supported his concern. At this point, the army of controlled corpses had already arrived. Due to the large size of the barrier created by Katie, its defensive effect was weakened, allowing the corpses to charge directly into the barrier. Additionally, a large number of corpses emerged from the graveyard. Titian also manipulated the water flow to flood the graveyard, forcing everyone to retreat. As the corpses and water covered the area, Bayer and Adonis took Kimbuck away. The water that had covered the graveyard suddenly disappeared. It was all an illusion set up by Katie to make Titian believe he had changed the water flow. After drawing all the corpses there, they set fire to them, also dealing with the bodies inside the graveyard to prevent further manipulation. However, desecrating the graveyard was an unforgivable act, and some could not accept it, but it was necessary for survival. Yet some corpses still emerged from the fires, soaked with a lot of blood. Since blood is also a liquid, Titian was able to manipulate it and severely injured several team members, including cutting off one of Guinness's hands. Guinness handed his sword, which required courage and fear to wield, to a girl from the evil squad. He had spent 7 years infusing it with fear, and the only aspect missing was courage. However, with his hand now severed, he likely couldn't continue to maintain the sword. Meanwhile, Titian charged at Adonis with her weapon, which had begun to consume her hand. Bayer noticed something off as she saw the two looking at each other. During their fierce battle, no one expected that when Adonis charged with dual swords, Titian would open her arms, allowing Adonis to impale her. She then pulled Adonis into the depth of the blood. Instinctively, Bayer jumped in after them, followed by Katie, who caught Bayer within the barrier. Bayer saw Adonis standing on a familiar creature in the middle, and with a hand that could corrode weapons, carved a question mark on the sword. Despite being attacked by Adonis, Titian wore a smile. Adonis asked if cutting her sword would make her happy, but Bayer noticed that Titian's sword resembled the sacred tree. Katie said it was a false god. Subsequently, Bayer helped Adonis break Titian's weapon, which grew a bit more before it completely died. Bayer suspected that Titian might have been controlled by her weapon. Turning around, she found Titian and Adonis embracing, saying they could finally touch each other with their hands again. After dealing with Titian, a solemn rain fell over the capital. Bayer learned from her senior Gap that Adonis's father had been killed by the later justice forces, and Gap was the one who had executed him. Bayer silently left the training ground, but bumped into a pink-haired young lady at the corner, apparently a noblewoman with little common sense but who took a liking to Bayer. Bayer saw her sneeze and worried she might catch a cold, but the girl said she had summoned the rain. This morning rain could only be performed by the strongest chief performers. The pink-haired girl, named Shirley, came here to meet Bayer's senior, Begna. Bayer had no choice but to take Shirley to Begna because Shirley was soaked, and only Begna, having once been a woman, had suitable dresses. They found Begna and Guinness drinking, and Shirley, lacking common sense, shattered a crystal containing hot water, ruining Begna's expensive carpet. Later, Bayer bathed with Shirley, while Begna and Guinness dared not confront Shirley about the incident, knowing her dual status as the chief performer and the king's daughter. Feeling cared for by Bayer, Shirley wanted to grant her a wish. Bayer asked for a song, just a regular song without repairs or blessings. As Shirley sang, Bayer felt her soul healed. Shirley said it was her first time giving her song as a gift, though Bayer sensed some pain in Shirley. It seemed like Shirley felt exposed when Bayer inadvertently stepped back. At that moment, Gap arrived. Shirley acknowledged that Bayer, as Gap had described, had the ability to discern truth. They soon left. Meanwhile, Titian's severed weapon was taken to the knights. Keel noted Bayer's great skill. Adonis asked if Keel knew about the trial of weapon restoration, which involved receiving a substance akin to sacred ash after repairing a severed weapon. The task was to find the person whose weapon had been broken. However, when the weapon was restored, it would test its bearer. Thus, when Gap severed Titian's weapon, it was Adonis who assisted in its restoration. But Titian fell into evil due to the weapon. Doubting this, Adonis was given a new directive by the priest to witness Keel merge with Titian's broken sword. If the bearer fell into evil again, Adonis was to sever Keel's sword and confront the priest. Keel's restored weapon turned out to be a symbol of justice, untainted by evil. Adonis wept, realizing Titian's fall was not due to his help with the weapon, thus resolving his guilt. Bayer and Adonis discussed Gap and Shirley. Begna suspected Bayer had a crush on Gap, but Bayer denied it. Adonis also stated Bayer and Gap couldn't be together because Bayer lacked beastly features, which were not considered attractive in beastly eyes. Suddenly, Adonis suggested that if he cut off his ears to look more like Bayer and they married and had children, their kids might look like Bayer. Bayer was upset, saying such things shouldn't be said lightly. Adonis asked Bayer what she thought, but she said such matters required love, which Adonis didn't quite understand. Changing the subject, Bayer asked Adonis about cultivating a sword. Adonis produced a weapon, but it immediately decayed. Adonis explained it was the curse of the traveler. A traveler once came to Adonis's family, knowing he had little time left. He asked Adonis's family to handle his affairs after his death and spent his remaining time helping them in battle, where he eventually died. Adonis's father came into contact with the traveler's blood, and the curse was passed down through the blood. Adonis's father overcame his fear, and the curse fell upon Adonis, born to be a traveler. However, Adonis could not find a reason to travel. Under the scrutiny of the divine tree, Adonis became an advanced swordsman but began to question the god's intentions and his own existence. Bayer saw a reflection of herself in Adonis and felt he was her companion, so she invited him to travel with her. Adonis, having a good impression of Bayer, thought traveling with her would be interesting and accepted her invitation. A few days later, Shirley approached Bayer again, mentioning that Bayer seemed pained while singing. Shirley sang for her country and people, fearing being ignored if she stopped. Just then, Adonis arrived to dine with Bayer, giving her an idea. She kissed him in gratitude and introduced her friend to Shirley. They listened to a traveling singer, and Shirley was moved to tears, especially learning that the singer could not hear or speak apart from singing. Shirley realized she wanted to be relied upon, and also to have friends to rely on. Since becoming friends with Bayer, Shirley invited her to a castle ball, offering her the finest clothes and jewelry. Bayer, feeling a bit embarrassed, went to the ball. Now a hero of the Sword Nation, she dealt with anyone who harassed her. Adonis, appearing drunk, praised Bayer and received a punch from her. Gap intervened, taking Adonis away but also complimenting Bayer, making her uneasy. Shirley performed on stage as a princess, and Bayer noticed her singing had become clear and happy as she resolved her issues. The two clearly became good friends. Turning around, Bayer met Katie, who called her his beloved girl and invited her to dance, saying Bayer was known as Void in his land, symbolizing the origin of all things. Meanwhile, Gap and Adonis discussed Titian, who had secretly loved Gap. Gap knew, but had severed her weapon, and asked Adonis about rumors of their romance, which Adonis denied. Gap sought Adonis to discuss his father's death at Gap's hands, and to exchange the sword for another weapon Adonis had obtained from other swordsmen. Adonis disagreed and challenged Gap. A priest rushed over upon hearing the news, but neither expected Keel, who seemed normal before, to suddenly turn dark and wound Gap with a single strike. Adonis felt uneasy when he saw the sword he was holding. Noticing Keel was looking for Bayer, Adonis rushed to stop him but was seriously injured. Keel thanked Adonis, saying the encounter enabled him to acquire a powerful weapon. Adonis's previously resolved emotional issues locked up again, this time more tightly. Meanwhile, Bayer, who was listening to Shirley sing, suddenly noticed the divine tree behind her glow. The tree merged with Shirley's body and announced that a devourer was attacking it. The devourer was Keel, who had fallen into evil. Bayer realized that to pass the traveler's test, she had to defeat Keel alone. After regaining control, Shirley urged Bayer to flee. By then, Keel had entered the banquet hall and killed several clerics. Neither Guinness nor Begna could stop him. Seeing Keel's arm corroded by the weapon, Bayer thought of Titian and remembered Adonis saying Titian was at rest, which angered her. Katie told Bayer she was chosen by the divine word and must defeat Keel here. Bayer instantly grabbed her great sword. The weapon changed color in sync with her emotions. As Katie held off Keel, she warned Bayer that Keel's weapon could even cut through her magic and urged her to be careful. Buyer, conflicted upon seeing Keel, recalled their first encounter when she broke his sword and had since broken another. Now, she expected to break it a third time. Buyer was saddened by Keel's brainwashed state, thinking his revival showed strong will, but lamenting his control by the weapon. Buyer cut off Keel's arm, different from with Titian. Keel's arm regenerated and wounded Buyer. Shirley, heartbroken, defied the divine word and asked others to save Buyer, angering Keel, who then attacked Shirley but was blocked by Buyer. Under the divine tree, Buyer saw the entity devouring Keel was the tree itself, a nation's god devouring its people. Shaken, Buyer was thrown back. She likened the evil to a phoenix and speculated if the god was trying to communicate something. In essence, the corrupted demon emerged due to the divine word from the divine tree. Only the demon perceived the truth. Buyer struck down Keel, who regained his senses before dying, and praised Buyer for her strength. Buyer realized the divine tree had never watched over her or anyone else. Buyer had passed 3 tests and was set to start the final trial tomorrow. However, Adonis hadn't moved past his trauma. Buyer waited for him because they planned to travel together. The night before Buyer's test, Adonis visited and kissed her secretly, but Buyer caught him. Adonis confessed his life was incomplete, and he was trapped by doubts, unable to leave with Buyer. Buyer told him to come and watch her test the next day. As Buyer approached the gate of travel, the great sword on her back suddenly lit up, symbolizing all the companions she had met along the way. Upon entering the gate, the surrounding clerics and the king asked Buyer why she embarked on her journey. Becoming a traveler meant freedom from any god or nation's control. The king's final test for Buyer was to play a musical instrument called the key, which turned out to be a piano. Buyer felt a sense of familiarity with this instrument. The king explained that the instrument bore ancient script, symbolizing freedom and self-expression. Buyer had almost reached the threshold of freedom, in harmony with her weapon, and desired to leave her own mark on the world. She only needed to complete the performance to leave. However, Buyer hesitated at this moment. This did not mean she intended to give up the test and stay. Buyer stated she would continue with the tests, but there were other unresolved matters. The king then told Buyer that her presence was not something the gods desired to see. If Buyer could not find her way out, she would never be able to play the key of freedom and would remain in the castle forever. Buyer declared her determination to travel. This place was not her home. Even if she could not play the key, she would find another way to break through the divine barrier, even if it meant death. Meanwhile, Adonis, nearly driven mad by his identity as a suspect, was approached by a group of swordsmen whose weapons had been taken. Adonis agreed to return their swords, but their greed led them to demand all his weapons, intending to become the new thieves. Adonis killed them and felt he was going insane. However, he still went to the place where Buyer was being tested, realizing he was attracted to her. Both were facing the test of departure. Buyer said she had not yet passed and would wait for him in his room. After saying goodbye to Buyer, Adonis confronted the king in the testing room, questioning what the holy ash was, what tests swordsmen with severed weapons would face, why gods demanded swordplay, and why these people went mad. His mission was to help others restore their weapons. The king told Adonis that all this was part of the divine script. Even doubters could not escape the laws. Adonis was to spread the ash of the testers, to help the divine tree grow new branches, as only the bodies of fallen swordsmen could become the healing holy ash. The swords of the fallen were made of endlessly multiplying steel cells, and it was due to a divine curse that Adonis had reached this point. His fate was to disappear from his current identity and become a cleric responsible for the holy ash, as the cleric's masks would not decay under Adonis's curse. However, Adonis refused this fate and killed the cleric before him, only to discover the cleric looked exactly like him. The king said Adonis would become part of the divine tree's record, and the clerics were like memory cards under the divine tree. Everyone Adonis killed became part of the divine tree. They surrounded Adonis, whose only way out was to play the key symbolizing freedom, to break free from the divine rules and become a traveler. However, without a reason for travel, he could not play the key. The king said Adonis could only become part of the divine tree. Adonis then turned dark, completely losing himself. Buyer is waiting for Adonis in his room, feeling confident she can pass the test and leave. Unexpectedly, when Adonis returns, he brings devastating news. His elder brother has died. Adonis claims it was fate, but his demeanor is off, desperately seeking Bayer's help. He confesses that his hand, which killed his mother, has never felt the warmth of the living, viewing himself as an incomplete dead man, longing for a complete death. Today, the king informed him that even in death, he must serve the divine tree, shattering his spirit. He doesn't want to be dragged to the graveyard but sees no way to resist, wishing instead to die by Bayer's hand. He mentions that the gate of travel cannot let two people through together, but Bayer refuses to play the role of his executioner. Adonis pushes her, but Bayer refuses, believing they are not in love. Adonis admits he does not understand love but feels Bayer is special to him, touching her through the blanket and commenting on her warmth. Angered, Bayer kicks him away. Adonis then meets Katie's gaze, sees himself in his most despised form, and screams as he flees to a hilltop in the suburbs, letting evil consume him. Adonis finds himself in a strange space where a woman, claiming to be a member of the Hunger Alliance, welcomes him and presents a new weapon she crafted for him. Touching the sword, Adonis finds it decayed but not destroyed, frozen in a peculiar state. The woman, named Dolan and a blacksmith from Lending, tells Adonis he possesses the power of death and should master it. For the first time, Adonis owns a sword of his own, still excited when he meets Bayer's master, Labrak. Labrak says he will train Adonis to quickly master the new sword. Meanwhile, Bayer, furious about Adonis's actions, smashes up his house before returning to her room to rest. She has been feeling down these days and seeks out Guinness and Begna, expressing a desire to join a battle in a few days. Both sense that Bayer is troubled by emotional issues. Although Begna has considered pursuing Bayer, both he and Guinness know she needs a travel companion, not a fleeting romance. However, such a companion does not exist, as Adonis also bears a heavy burden. Nevertheless, they do not refuse Bayer's request to join the upcoming battle between the forces of good and evil. Ever since Adonis's cursed hand touched her, Bayer feels her physical condition deteriorating and can no longer communicate with her great sword, resulting in her being gravely injured in the fight. At the same time, Labrak was instructing Adonis on how to unleash the power of the sword he had picked up earlier, demanding that Adonis break all the swords in front of him as they were the source of his power. Labrak warned that if Adonis couldn't do it, he would never defeat his foster daughter. Then, Labrak severely beat Adonis in the room, breaking his weapon several times. Adonis lay on the ground like a dead dog, and Labrak kicked him in the stomach, indicating the training would continue, seemingly taking revenge for Bayer. After Bayer was severely injured, Begna and others rescued her. Guinness told Begna that the aquatic race was hermaphroditic, which was convenient for connecting with a swordsman's heart. As Bayer had hidden her true self, only Begna could now help her. Guinness also mentioned that Begna's eye injury might not be physical, but rather an emotional wound. Adonis was under Dolan's care, who understood him well because every sword she created could foresee its wielder's future. She had Adonis soak in a medicinal bath before resuming his rigorous training. Labrak brutally trained Adonis daily, pushing him to the brink. Adonis asked Labrak why he didn't just kill him. Labrak revealed that the curse on Adonis was originally meant for him. He had escaped his fate years ago and was deceived by his own weapon, which harmed someone else. Later, Labrak found an intelligible sword in a blacksmith shop where he met Dolan, who was male at the time. Dolan had a close friend who did not cause his gender transformation. After meeting Labrak, Dolan, emotionally dependent, decided to follow him and tearfully said goodbye to his friend, transitioning to a female. Dolan, introduced by Labrak to the king, was commissioned to obtain a branch from the divine tree and forge a priest's sword. However, Dolan discovered the tree's destined destruction and refused to sacrifice it for the creation of the sword. Seeing the truth, Dolan found Bayer's presence in it and was forced to rule the divine realm, becoming the kingdom's princess. Soon after, soldiers told Labrak that Dolan's friend had been consumed by a weapon Dolan forged. Dolan, in disbelief, studied the broken axe and found traces of the divine tree. He learned his friend had transformed while pursuing the ash of the pursuer. Dolan said divine power erases the future, and after that, the weapons he created changed completely, becoming nearly incomprehensible to others, except for the one given to Gap. Dolan engraved the curse from the sword onto himself and began experiencing hallucinations, slowly being led into darkness. Labrak and Dolan raised Adonis to challenge Bayer, the arbiter of truth, because she was the reason for this world's existence. She was destined to destroy the old order and create a new one. This was why Labrak insisted on Bayer starting her journey, having learned the truth from the rabbit tribe. When Bayer was born, Labrak initially planned to act first, but ultimately chose to raise her. Labrak said that it was a true god who brought about the twilight of the gods to the ancient gods, but the real reason behind these ancient gods becoming rulers was Bayer. However, the specific reason must be sought by Adonis. Then, Adonis learned from Dolan that he was not cursed after all, but had cursed himself. Once Adonis could overcome his psychological shadows, he would be able to freely use that power. In the end, Adonis successfully used this power to defeat Labrak and became the real ruler of the Hunger Alliance, ultimately falling into evil. Is there anyone who still remembers Bayer? Did the last episode really defeat the female lead?